Hey guys, tonight we begin with a world that has no school bell, no factory whistle, no phone alarm buzzing angrily beside the bed, and absolutely no calendar notification reminding you about a meeting that could have been an email. So dim the lights, get comfortable, maybe pull the blanket up just a little higher, and let your mind drift backward, far backward. Tonight we're wandering into medieval Europe before the morning bell ever rang, before clocks ruled daily life, and before anyone had the luxury of hitting the snooze button, mostly because there wasn't one. If you overslept, the cows would probably let everyone know long before your neighbors did. Very considerate creatures. Really, as always, this isn't a story about famous battles or glorious victories. We're following ordinary people through an ordinary day. The kind of day historians rarely wrote down because nobody thought surviving another Tuesday deserved documentation, which is slightly unfair, considering Tuesday was often harder than fighting a dragon. Dragons, at least, only appeared occasionally. So settle in, breathe slowly, and let's spend the next little while discovering what life felt like before the first bell. Long before church towers dominated the skyline, and long before giant mechanical clocks began telling entire towns what time it supposedly was, people still woke up. Not because they wanted to, because the world politely insisted. Imagine opening your eyes inside a small timber house, sometime around the year 1200. The room is dark, not dramatically dark, just dark enough that you aren't completely certain where the wall ends and your sleeping brother begins. The fire has mostly burned itself into glowing orange coals. The air feels surprisingly cold. You can hear someone breathing nearby. Maybe 6 people, maybe 10. Privacy is not really part of the architectural design philosophy here. Your mattress, assuming we can generously use that word, is little more than a sack stuffed with straw. Fresh straw if you're lucky. Old straw if your family has other priorities. And honestly, they probably do. Replacing bedding sits fairly low on the list when winter keeps trying to kill everyone every single year. You stretch. Something pokes your shoulder. Probably another piece of straw. Hopefully another piece of straw. You decide not to investigate further because medieval mornings are all about choosing which problems deserve attention. This one doesn't. Not yet. Outside, the world remains quiet. There are no engines, no airplanes, no distant highways humming across the horizon. Instead, you hear wind, wood creaking, perhaps a sheep complaining about something deeply personal. A rooster, who has apparently appointed himself chief executive officer at dawn. Nobody elected him. He simply started screaming every morning until everyone accepted his authority. History contains many examples of leadership working exactly like this. You slowly sit upright. The house smells complicated, with smoke, damp wool, earth, animal hides, yesterday's stew, fresh bread if someone woke before you, old cabbage if they didn't. Modern people often imagine medieval villages as smelling terrible all the time. The truth is a little more nuanced. Some places certainly smelled awful, tanneries especially. Entire neighborhoods quietly accepted that leather production required sacrificing everyone's sense of smell. But inside ordinary homes, scents shifted constantly with weather, cooking, livestock, smoke, herbs, and people themselves. Nothing smelled artificially clean. Nothing smelled chemically fresh. Everything smelled alive, including you, especially you. Soap exists. Bathing exists. Neither happens with quite the frequency your future dentist would probably recommend. Not that dentists are having a wonderful time either. Let's not judge. The first task isn't breakfast. It isn't conversation. It isn't checking messages because there are no messages. The first task is simple. Figure out the weather. Weather controls everything. Not metaphorically. Literally. A little rain changes planting. A hard frost changes food supplies. A dry summer changes taxes. A failed harvest changes whether people survive next year. Weather isn't small talk. Weather is management. So someone cracks open the wooden door. Cold air immediately floods inside. Everyone silently gathers information. Clouds, wind, mist, birdsong, the smell of damp soil. These observations matter. Nobody needs an app telling them conditions outside. Nature already published today's report. It simply refuses to use notifications. If today is planting season, every minute counts. If today is harvest season, every minute counts even more. If today is winter, well, congratulations. Everything counts. You pull on yesterday's clothes, because they're also today's clothes, and probably tomorrow's. Clothing is expensive, really expensive. A wool tunic represents months of work. A cloak represents serious wealth. Shoes deserve almost emotional attachment. You repair them, patch them, resole them, pass them down. Eventually someone else repairs them again. Fast fashion would sound absolutely insane. You mean you threw away perfectly usable clothes because another color became popular? Yes, the medieval tailor quietly faints. Of course, not everyone dresses alike. The village blacksmith owns sturdier clothing. The local priest dresses differently. The miller has flour permanently decorating everything he owns. Children wear whatever still fits. Adults wear whatever still survives. Fashion exists, but practicality usually wins, except among royalty. Royalty often looked at practicality and politely ignored it. We'll visit them another night. For now, we're staying with people whose wardrobe decisions mostly revolve around not freezing. Outside, dawn arrives slowly. The sun doesn't leap dramatically over the horizon. Instead, light quietly spills across fields. Mist curls over damp grass. Birds begin negotiating territory. Somewhere a cow expresses disappointment. About what? Impossible to say. Cows often seem disappointed as a lifestyle choice. The village gradually wakes. Doors creak open. Smoke rises from roofs. Dogs begin wandering with great professional confidence despite having absolutely no scheduled appointments. Children yawn. Adults immediately start working. There's surprisingly little lingering, because work isn't something you leave home to do. Home already contains work. Fields contain work. Animals contain work. Bread contains work. Even resting yesterday simply created enough energy for today's work. It's an elegantly exhausting system. Breakfast arrives. Usually simple. Bread, porridge, perhaps cheese, maybe onions. Ale surprisingly often. Yes, ale. Not because everyone wanted an exciting morning. Because brewing frequently produced safer drinks than untreated water. Medieval ale often contained very little alcohol. Enough to preserve. Not enough to derail the entire farming schedule. Although exceptions certainly existed. Human beings have always been remarkably creative about drinking too much. That particular tradition spans civilizations. The bread deserves appreciation. Bread isn't merely food. It's security, status, routine, comfort. Different grains tell different stories. Wealthier households enjoy finer wheat. Poorer families eat rye, oats, barley, or mixtures depending on local harvests. Some bread feels light. Some feels heavy enough to qualify as construction material. Both disappear quickly. Calories matter. Nobody counts them. They simply need them. Breakfast conversation remains fairly limited. People know today's jobs. No motivational speeches required. No inspirational posters reading, "Teamwork makes the dream work." The dream is surviving until next harvest. Motivation comes naturally. Children begin helping surprisingly early. Modern childhood often emphasizes play. Medieval childhood emphasizes usefulness. Not because parents lack affection. Quite the opposite. Teaching children practical skills dramatically increases everyone's chances. A 7-year-old might gather eggs, watch younger siblings, carry water, collect firewood, scare birds from fields. None of this feels unusual, because everyone around them learned exactly the same way. Childhood looks different when average life expectancy remains uncertain, and every capable pair of hands contributes. That doesn't mean children never laugh, never play, never invent ridiculous games involving sticks. Children remain wonderfully consistent across history. Give them mud, they'll find entertainment. Give them absolutely nothing, they'll somehow invent even better entertainment. Adults have been underestimating children for thousands of years. Speaking of underestimating people, let's float gently toward the village women. Historical records often center on men. Kings, Knights, bishops, merchants. Meanwhile, women quietly keep entire households functioning almost invisibly. Cooking, brewing, gardening, spinning wool, weaving cloth, raising children, managing food stores, caring for animals, making candles, preparing medicines from herbs, cleaning, repairing, sometimes working fields too. It's difficult to identify where one job ends and another begins because they overlap continuously. Modern productivity experts would probably have nervous breakdowns attempting to color code the schedule. Spinning deserves special attention. Imagine twisting wool into thread, hour after hour, day after day, winter after winter. Without thread, there is no cloth. Without cloth, there are no clothes. Without clothes, well, Northern Europe becomes considerably less enjoyable. The spinning wheel eventually improves efficiency. Before that, drop spindles perform remarkable work despite looking deceptively simple. Thousands of tiny movements, thousands of patient hours. Every shirt begins here, every blanket, every cloak. History often celebrates castles. Thread probably deserve more applause. Meanwhile, men prepare tools. Wooden plows, iron blades, axes, ropes, harnesses. Everything requires maintenance. Nothing lasts forever. Replacement costs dearly. Repairing becomes almost second nature. If something breaks, you fix it. If you can't fix it, someone nearby probably can. Specialization exists. Community exists too. Nobody survives entirely alone. Even isolated farms depend on neighboring villages. Trade, marriage, seasonal labor, shared mills, shared ovens, shared gossip, especially shared gossip. Information travels surprisingly well without internet. Admittedly, it also changes shape rather dramatically along the journey. A traveler might mention one merchant purchased 3 pigs. 3 villages later, the story somehow involves 17 pigs, 2 mysterious foreigners, and suspiciously enchanted cheese. Human communication hasn't changed nearly as much as we'd like to believe. Back inside the house, the fire receives careful attention. Fire is life. Heat, cooking, light, dry clothing, warm water, protection against dampness. Keeping a fire alive overnight requires skill. Starting one from scratch every morning wastes precious energy. Ashes are carefully managed, coals preserved, fuel collected continuously. Firewood doesn't magically appear. Someone gathered it, carried it, stacked it, protected it from rain. Everything represents labor, even warmth, especially warmth. Soon people leave for fields. Paths gradually fill. Wooden carts creak. Oxen move with magnificent determination and absolutely no interest in hurrying. Oxen understand something modern civilization forgot. Walking steadily eventually gets you there. Panicking rarely helps. Farmers carry tools polished smooth through years of use. Each scratch tells a story. Each repaired handle reflects another season survived. Iron remains valuable. Wood remains valuable. Time remains valuable. Nothing is disposable. Nothing is casual. The fields stretch outward beneath the growing morning light. Some belong directly to peasants. Some belong to landlords. Some belong to monasteries. Ownership becomes complicated very quickly. Feudal obligations shape daily routines. Certain days belong partly to your own family. Other days belong partly to someone else's estate. Taxes appear in crops. Labor, animals, coin if available. People don't simply work because food grows. They work because obligations multiply almost as reliably as weeds. Of course, weeds never demand paperwork. They're refreshingly straightforward. The rhythm of agricultural life settles in. Step, dig, lift, carry, repeat. Birdsong mixes with quiet conversation. Wind bends grain. Cloud shadows drift across distant hills. Nobody hurries unnecessarily. Nobody dawdles either. The day has found its pace. And before anyone notices, the morning has already begun slipping gently toward afternoon. By now, the sun has climbed high enough that the morning mist has quietly surrendered. The fields no longer look mysterious. They simply look large. Much larger when every inch of them expects something from you. Standing at the edge of a medieval field, you quickly realize how different the landscape feels without modern machinery. There is no distant tractor humming away, no irrigation system clicking rhythmically, no pickup truck bouncing across a dirt road, carrying coffee in one cup holder and optimism in the other. Just people, animals, wood, iron, and patience. An astonishing amount of patience. If there is one skill nearly every medieval farmer mastered, it was accepting that nature refused to work on human schedules. Seeds germinated when they were ready. Rain arrived whenever it pleased. Winter ignored complaints completely. Nature was, in many ways, history's most stubborn landlord. You might own the field, or perhaps someone else officially owned it. Either way, the weather remained firmly independent. The work itself looked repetitive. That is because it was dig, lift, turn, plant, straighten your back, look toward the horizon, wonder how much remains. Realize the answer is quite a lot. Continue digging. Modern exercise programs love to advertise functional movement. Medieval life accidentally invented it centuries earlier. There were no fitness memberships. Your gym was simply existence. By the end of a normal day, nearly every muscle had participated in keeping you alive. And nobody congratulated you for reaching 10,000 steps. You probably doubled that before breakfast. The soil tells experienced farmers almost everything they need to know. Too wet, too dry, too sandy, too heavy, rich, poor, hungry, healthy. The earth has its own language. People learn it the same way children learn speech. Slowly, patiently, mistakes included. An elderly farmer can often crumble a handful of dirt between rough fingers and quietly predict the season better than someone carrying expensive scientific instruments. Not because science is wrong, but because 40 years of touching the same field teaches remarkable things. Knowledge accumulates without books, without classrooms, without certificates. Simply by surviving. Around the edges of the fields, wildflowers sway gently in the breeze. Bees drift lazily from blossom to blossom. Nobody fully understands pollination yet. People simply know flowers are good. Bees are useful. Honey is wonderful. And getting stung remains extremely unpopular. Some truths never become outdated. Nearby, children chase birds away from newly planted grain. This sounds simple. It is not. Birds possess an almost supernatural confidence. You wave your arms dramatically. They fly away. You look somewhere else for approximately 7 seconds. They're back. The birds seem personally invested in testing your patience. Some villages use scarecrows. Others use strings with fluttering cloth. Children themselves become moving scarecrows, though admittedly less frightening, unless they skip bathing for several weeks. Different sort of scarecrow. The livestock require constant attention. Cows need grazing. Sheep need watching. Goats require supervision mostly because goats view every fence as a personal insult. Goats have apparently spent thousands of years believing boundaries are merely suggestions. They climb, escape, nibble absolutely everything, then somehow appear offended when someone tries to bring them home. History contains countless stories of kings making terrible decisions. Goats simply make tiny, terrible decisions every afternoon. Both are strangely entertaining from a safe distance. The village pigs wander with determined little grunts, searching beneath bushes and trees. Unlike the tidy pink pigs often imagined today, many medieval pigs look leaner, darker, and considerably more athletic. They spend much of their lives finding food themselves. Acorns, roots, fallen fruit, anything edible, quite often things that probably shouldn't be edible. Pigs maintain surprisingly flexible standards. Dogs drift nearby. These are working animals, not decorative companions. Although people certainly become attached to them, a good sheepdog saves enormous amounts of labor. A loyal watchdog protects livestock. A hunting dog might help provide precious meat. Their value goes beyond affection, but affection grows anyway. Humans are rather predictable like that. Spend enough time beside any reasonably friendly creature, and eventually someone gives it a name, perhaps a very unimaginative name. Brownie, Spot, Old Nose. History rarely preserved pet names, which is honestly disappointing. Imagine discovering a royal document declaring taxes, while another page casually mentions that everyone's favorite village dog was named Sausage. Some details deserve immortality. The horses receive different treatment. Most ordinary peasants do not own riding horses. Good horses cost serious money. Oxen usually perform heavy farm work. They're slower, much slower, but they are powerful, dependable, less expensive to maintain, and far less dramatic. Horses occasionally panic. Oxen generally consider panic an unnecessary use of energy. If an ox ever wrote motivational books, every chapter would probably contain exactly one sentence. Keep walking. Solid advice, honestly. As the morning continues, the village itself begins humming with activity. From a distance, smoke rises steadily above the rooftops. Not thick black smoke. Gentle gray streams drifting upward through cool air. Nearly every household has something cooking. Bread baking, porridge simmering, soup quietly bubbling. Smoke hangs over villages so consistently that travelers sometimes smell home before seeing it. There are sounds too. Axes striking wood. Chickens protesting imaginary injustices. A spinning wheel turning. Children laughing. Someone singing quietly while working. No audience. No performance. Just keeping rhythm. Music exists almost everywhere. Not grand concerts. Simple melodies. Familiar tunes remembered rather than written. A mother humming while kneading dough. A shepherd whistling across open hills. Workers matching movements to old songs whose composers disappeared generations ago. Entire communities carry music inside memory. Nobody worries about copyright. Monasteries preserve sacred music with incredible care. Ordinary villages preserve everyday songs simply by refusing to forget them. The blacksmith's forge now burns bright. If there is one building almost guaranteed to attract attention, it is the smithy. Part workshop, part repair shop, part neighborhood information center. Everyone eventually needs something fixed. A broken plow, a damaged horseshoe, a bent knife, a loose hinge. Iron rarely stays useful forever. The blacksmith stands near glowing coals, hammer rising and falling with steady precision. Clang, pause, clang, pause. The rhythm carries surprisingly far. People recognize it instantly. It is one of those sounds that quietly define civilization. Metal becoming useful again. Visitors often linger nearby, not because they have business, because watching skilled craftsmanship never gets old. A child stares wide-eyed as orange metal changes shape. To that child, it almost looks like magic. In fairness, it probably feels like magic to many adults too. Take a black stone from the ground, heat it, hammer it. Suddenly it becomes a knife, or a plow, or a lock. Quite impressive, really. The blacksmith enjoys unusual respect. Strength matters. Experience matters even more. One mistake ruins expensive metal. Precision saves entire harvests. Few people understand every step of the process. Everyone appreciates the results. Just beyond the forge, another craft quietly continues. The carpenter. Wood appears everywhere in medieval life. Houses, bowls, tables, buckets, doors, wagons, tools, fences, cradles, coffins. If something exists, there's a reasonable chance someone built at least part of it from wood. Trees become buildings. Branches become handles. Logs become bridges. Nothing goes to waste. Even wood shavings often help start tomorrow's fire. A skilled carpenter doesn't simply cut wood. He studies it, where the grain runs, where knots hide, which pieces naturally bend, which ones stubbornly refuse. Working with wood means cooperating with the tree long after it has stopped growing. Force rarely wins. Understanding does. Meanwhile, back inside the cottages, another world continues almost unnoticed. Bread making. The process begins long before anyone smells fresh loaves. Grain must first be harvested, then dried, then taken to the mill, then ground into flour, then carried home, then mixed, then kneaded, then baked. A single loaf represents dozens of separate tasks performed by many different people. Modern supermarkets quietly hide this complexity. Medieval villages lived inside it every day. The village oven often becomes a social center. Not every household owns a proper baking oven. Many families bring prepared dough to a communal oven. People wait together, talk together, exchange news, trade recipes that are mostly variations of add whatever survived winter. Nobody complains about standing in line while staring at phones. There are no phones. So people perform the ancient human tradition of simply talking. Remarkable concept. One woman mentions someone's daughter is expecting a baby. Another quietly shares that wolves were heard beyond the forest last night. Someone else complains that last year's cheese was better. Every generation firmly believes last year's cheese was somehow superior. Memory is generous that way. Across the village green, a traveling merchant finally appears. Not every day, but often enough. His cart rattles slowly over uneven ground. People glance up from their work. Visitors mean stories, news, possibly useful goods, possibly outrageous prices. Sometimes both. His inventory might seem wonderfully random. Needles, salt, bright ribbons, small knives, imported spices in tiny quantities, bits of colored glass, metal buckles, perhaps a few books if fortune smiles. Everything packed carefully, everything valuable. Salt deserves special attention. Today it sits casually on restaurant tables. Back then it preserved food through entire winters. Without enough salt, meat spoiled, fish spoiled, supplies vanished. A sack of salt could matter almost as much as money itself. Funny how history quietly reminds us that ordinary things become extraordinary under different circumstances. The merchant himself becomes entertainment. Where has he traveled? What cities has he seen? Did he truly meet a knight? Is that story about a bridge collapsing actually true? Travelers become living newspapers. Occasionally very unreliable newspapers. Still fascinating. Children gather around him immediately, not because they intend to purchase anything, because children everywhere remain experts at identifying interesting strangers. Perhaps he carries tiny carved toys. Maybe colorful cloth, unlike anything in the village. Maybe absolutely nothing exciting. Children still watch. Curiosity costs nothing. By midday, the sun stands overhead. People finally pause. Not for long. Just long enough to eat. Lunch remains practical. Bread again. Cheese. Onions. Perhaps beans. Cold leftovers. Maybe smoked fish if available. Nobody expects a 5-course meal halfway through planting season. Efficiency wins. Shade becomes valuable. Workers sit beneath trees, against stone walls, beside hedges. Conversations drift lazily between bites. Nobody rushes to fill every silence. Silence itself feels comfortable. The breeze moves through tall grass. Birds continue singing as though they alone own the countryside. In some ways, they probably believe they do. A farmer leans back for one brief moment. He studies the clouds. Not idly, professionally. Rain may arrive by evening. Or tomorrow. He quietly adjusts tomorrow's plans before tomorrow even begins. Planning without certainty becomes second nature. Modern weather forecasts are helpful. Medieval weather forecasting often involves knees, elbows, old scars, cloud colors, bird behavior, and conversations beginning with, "I've got a feeling." Surprisingly, those feelings sometimes prove remarkably accurate. Not always, but often enough to earn respect. As the short midday rest comes to an end, people rise almost automatically. No bell orders them. No supervisor checks attendance. The unfinished work simply waits. Patiently, silently. Fields never send reminders. They don't need to. The grain is already asking. And little by little, the long afternoon stretches out before them, carrying another quiet collection of ordinary tasks that, together, keep an entire medieval world alive. The afternoon arrives so gradually that nobody really notices the exact moment it begins. There is no lunch break ending with a cheerful ringtone. No digital clock announcing 1 p.m. No calendar reminder politely informing everyone that another meeting could have absolutely been avoided. Instead, someone simply finishes the last bite of bread, brushes a few crumbs from their tunic, stands up with a quiet sigh, and returns to work. That is the schedule. Simple, predictable, entirely controlled by sunlight. If you somehow transported a modern office worker into this medieval afternoon, one of the first things they would notice is how incredibly steady everything feels. Busy, certainly, but not frantic. Nobody is sprinting from task to task while checking 3 different devices. People work continuously instead. Hours pass almost unnoticed because there are very few interruptions. The field doesn't send emails. The sheep don't organize surprise meetings. The chickens, thankfully, have not yet invented performance reviews, although they do seem strangely qualified to judge everyone. The heat settles over the countryside, not unbearable, just enough that every movement asks for a little more effort. Sweat darkens linen shirts. Hands become rougher. Dust clings to boots. The smell of warm earth rises gently from the ground. It is surprisingly pleasant. Fresh soil has a scent that modern cities rarely experience anymore. Rich, mineral, alive. It smells like things growing. Around the fields, insects hum endlessly. Bees continue their important business with admirable professionalism. Butterflies drift lazily between patches of wildflowers. Dragonflies patrol ponds with the confidence of tiny flying knights. Meanwhile, flies remain committed to being universally unpopular. Some traditions never disappear. The work itself changes depending on the season. Spring means planting. Summer means tending. Autumn means harvesting. Winter means repairing absolutely everything that survived the other 3 seasons. Every part of the year has its own rhythm. Every rhythm demands different skills. Today, perhaps, the grain has begun growing tall enough that weeds must be removed. This sounds straightforward. It is not. Imagine kneeling for hours beneath the afternoon sun, carefully separating useful plants from useless ones. Make too many mistakes, and your harvest suffers. Miss too many weeds, and your harvest suffers. Nature offers remarkably little room for carelessness. One elderly woman moves slowly down the rows. Her back is bent from decades of work. Her hands are weathered. Her face carries deep lines carved by sunlight rather than age alone. She has probably forgotten more about farming than most educated scholars of her century ever learned. Nobody calls her an agricultural expert. There are no certificates hanging on cottage walls. No university lectures. No impressive titles. Just experience. And experience quietly earns respect. Young people watch carefully, not because someone assigned them homework, because eventually they will inherit these fields. The lessons matter. A grandmother demonstrates how to recognize healthy wheat. A grandfather explains when to cut hay. An aunt knows which herbs soothe stomach pain. An uncle understands where floods usually begin after heavy rain. Knowledge passes from mouth to ear, generation after generation. No textbooks required. Memory becomes a library. Sometimes historians call this oral tradition, which sounds wonderfully academic. In practice, it often looks like someone saying, "No, not that plant," followed immediately by, "I made that mistake once." Experience is an excellent teacher. It simply charges rather high tuition. Nearby, a young boy attempts to help stack bundles of hay. The bundles are almost as large as he is. He struggles, adjusts his grip, drops one, looks around to see whether anyone noticed. Of course someone noticed. An older farmer smiles quietly. He doesn't laugh. He simply picks up the bundle and shows the boy an easier way to carry it. The lesson takes perhaps 30 seconds. The memory lasts decades. That is how many practical skills survive, not through formal instruction, through thousands of tiny moments scattered across ordinary afternoons. The hay itself becomes surprisingly important. It isn't simply grass. It is winter, or rather, it is a promise that animals might still have something to eat when snow covers the fields. Every wagon load gathered now represents fewer hungry livestock several months later. Farmers constantly think ahead, not because they enjoy planning, because nature insists upon it. Summer always pretends it will last forever. Winter always proves otherwise. Along the edge of one field, several women gather herbs growing wild beneath hedges. Modern grocery stores make ingredients feel wonderfully convenient. Medieval life does not. If you want medicinal herbs, someone has to recognize them correctly This is rather important. The difference between healing tea and accidental poisoning can occasionally be uncomfortably small. Mint, yarrow, sage, chamomile, thyme, plantain, names familiar today. Valuable then. Some help wounds. Others calm coughs. Others settle stomachs after eating something that perhaps should have remained uneaten, which, to be fair, occasionally happened. Food preservation was excellent by medieval standards. Medieval standards simply differ from ours. Knowledge of herbs often belonged to women, not exclusively, but commonly. Mothers taught daughters. Neighbors shared advice. Monasteries recorded recipes. Experience slowly accumulated over centuries. No one understood bacteria. No one spoke about microbes. Yet people still notice patterns. This plant usually helps. That one rarely does. Observation comes long before scientific explanation. History is full of people discovering useful things centuries before understanding why they worked. Let's wander a little closer to the forest. The trees stand dark and cool beyond the open farmland. They are beautiful, useful, and just slightly unsettling. Not because monsters definitely live there. Mostly because forests are wonderfully good at encouraging imagination. Children grow up hearing stories. Wolves, spirits, strange travelers, hidden treasures, mysterious hermits. Whether those stories are true almost doesn't matter. The forest feels different. It absorbs sound. Light filters unevenly through leaves. Every snapped twig attracts attention. For ordinary villagers, forests provide endless resources. Firewood, berries, nuts, mushrooms, medicinal plants, building timber, game animals if hunting rights allow. But forests also require caution. You can become lost surprisingly quickly beneath dense trees, especially without convenient little blue dots announcing, "You are here." The medieval solution involves memory, landmarks, familiar paths, experience. Again, experience quietly solves another problem. Several woodcutters swing axes with practiced rhythm, with chips scatter across the forest floor. The sound echoes softly between trunks. Tree selection matters. Straight trees become beams. Curved branches become tool handles. Smaller wood becomes firewood. Almost every part finds a purpose. Waste is rare. Necessity encourages creativity. One tree might eventually become part of a roof, a wagon wheel, a spoon, a cradle, a church door, several fence posts, and tomorrow morning's cooking fire. Quite an impressive retirement plan for a tree. Farther along the path, a shepherd watches his flock spread across grassy hillsides. At first glance, it appears wonderfully peaceful. The sheep quietly graze. Clouds drift overhead. The breeze rustles long grass. It almost resembles a painting. Then one sheep decides another hillside looks marginally greener. A second sheep follows. Then a third. Within moments, the shepherd is walking briskly across a hill, reminding everyone that sheep collectively possess roughly half of one good idea, perhaps less. Shepherding requires patience bordering on sainthood. Fortunately, medieval society contains many patient people, mostly because impatience accomplishes remarkably little. The wool growing on those sheep will eventually become clothing, blankets, cloaks, hats, socks if someone feels particularly ambitious. Everything begins here, quietly chewing grass beneath a warm afternoon sun. History often celebrates finished products, rarely the sleepy sheep responsible for them. The village mill sits beside a gently flowing stream. Its water wheel turns steadily, round and round, hour after hour. The movement feels strangely hypnotic. Water performs work humans no longer need to perform themselves. Quite a revolutionary concept. The miller becomes one of the busiest people in town. Everyone needs flour, which means everyone eventually visits. Grain arrives in sacks. Flour leaves in sacks. Simple enough, except the miller must carefully maintain the machinery. Water levels change. Wood wears down. Millstones gradually become smooth and require sharpening. Nothing here simply runs forever. Maintenance quietly keeps civilization functioning. The mill also gathers conversation. While waiting, villagers exchange news. discuss weather, arrange marriages, argue gently over property boundaries, wonder whether the merchant exaggerated his stories yesterday. He probably did. Travelers often improve reality slightly, not maliciously, just enough to keep audiences interested. Humans have always appreciated a well-told story. Speaking of stories, afternoons often become the time when older villagers share them. Not formal storytelling sessions, just conversation while hands remain busy. Someone remembers a harsh winter from 40 years ago. Someone recalls a year floods destroyed 3 bridges. Someone describes seeing a comet. Another insists the local lord once fell into a pond while trying to impress visitors. That last story grows funnier every year, especially if the lord isn't present to defend himself. History tends to become slightly more entertaining with repeated telling. Memory edits, polishes, occasionally exaggerates, though usually with affectionate intentions. Children absorb these stories almost accidentally. No one gathers them into a classroom. They simply hear them while spinning wool, carrying water, collecting eggs. Knowledge arrives naturally, wrapped inside conversation, wrapped inside laughter, wrapped inside ordinary afternoons that nobody realizes future historians will desperately wish had been recorded in greater detail. Because this quiet afternoon, this ordinary workday, this simple conversation beneath an oak tree, this is what most medieval life actually looked like. Not tournaments, not castles, not dramatic speeches before battle. Just people trying to finish today's work before tomorrow politely delivered another full list. The shadows begin stretching a little longer now, almost too subtle to notice. The sun slowly starts its descent. The air loses a hint of its midday warmth. Birdsong changes. The countryside seems to exhale. Nobody stops working yet, but everyone knows the afternoon is quietly slipping toward evening, and in a world ruled by daylight, evening always arrives sooner than you'd like. Without anyone announcing it, the day begins to soften. The sunlight loses its sharp white edge and turns warmer, spilling across the fields in shades of gold and amber. Long shadows stretch across the furrows like dark ribbons, slowly creeping farther with every passing minute. Nobody needs a clock to notice. The land itself keeps perfect time. The birds know. The livestock know. Even the dogs seem aware that the busiest hours are nearly finished. People simply feel it. Modern life often separates work and home with a commute. You leave one place, travel through traffic, and eventually arrive somewhere that hopefully contains dinner. Medieval life isn't arranged quite so neatly. Home and work overlap constantly. The fields are home. The animals are home. The workshop is home. Even walking back from the fields usually includes another dozen small jobs. There is never really an off switch, only different kinds of work. One farmer pauses and leans on his wooden hoe, not because the work is finished, because his shoulders quietly remind him they belong to a human being rather than an ox. He studies the sky once more. Still clear. Good. Tomorrow might remain dry. Perhaps another productive day. Perhaps not. Optimism and caution have learned to share the same bench. Nearby, several women begin gathering woven baskets filled with vegetables. Carrots, turnips, leeks, cabbages, beans. Nothing especially glamorous. Nobody writes poems celebrating the irresistible beauty of turnips. Although, after a difficult winter, someone probably could. Hunger has a remarkable ability to improve culinary reviews. Each vegetable carries months of careful attention. Seeds planted at exactly the right time. Weeds removed. Pests discouraged. Weather endured. A basket of vegetables isn't simply food. It's evidence that countless ordinary decisions were made correctly. History often celebrates victories. Harvests deserve equal applause. A child proudly carries 2 onions. Only 2. His contribution isn't enormous. He knows that. The adults know that too. Nobody laughs. Instead, someone thanks him. The onions matter. More importantly, helping matters. Responsibility grows gradually. One tiny task today becomes larger responsibilities years later. Nobody suddenly wakes up at 25 magically understanding how to run a household. The lessons began with onions and eggs and gathering sticks, and carrying water without spilling half of it, especially that last one. Carrying water sounds wonderfully simple until you remember there are no indoor taps, no kitchen faucet, no bathroom sink. Every bucket begins somewhere else, usually a well, sometimes a stream, occasionally a spring. Water collection is one of those invisible tasks that quietly occupies enormous amounts of time. Modern plumbing performs miracles so ordinary that most people never think about them. Turn the handle, water appears. Turn it again, water disappears. A medieval villager witnessing this might reasonably conclude your kitchen contains very polite magic. The village well gradually becomes busy. Buckets rise and fall. Ropes creak softly. People greet one another, exchange small pieces of news, ask about relatives, discuss tomorrow's weather predictions with complete confidence despite possessing absolutely no satellites. Some predictions prove surprisingly accurate. Others, well, history has always included people confidently explaining things they could not possibly know. That tradition remains alive and well. The well itself serves another purpose beyond water. It becomes one of the village's social centers. Information circulates here almost as reliably as fresh water. Who is getting married? Who is expecting a child? Whose cow wandered into someone else's cabbage patch? Which traveler passed through yesterday? Has the local lord announced new taxes? Nothing stays secret for very long. Villages function rather like enormous extended families. Supportive, curious, occasionally wonderfully nosy. Privacy exists, just less enthusiastically. As workers slowly return home, the paths fill once again. Boots crunch over dry earth. Cartwheels rattle over stones. Oxen plod steadily without displaying the slightest interest in increasing speed. The ox remains history's greatest advocate for taking things one step at a time. One can almost imagine conversation. Would you like to hurry? No. Fair enough. A flock of geese waddles confidently across the road. Nobody argues with them. This isn't because geese possess legal authority. It's because they possess personalities that strongly suggest legal authority. Some creatures simply project confidence. Geese have mastered it. Children run ahead toward the cottages. Unlike the adults, they still possess astonishing amounts of energy. How children manage to sprint after working all day remains one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. Perhaps they are secretly powered by optimism. Or perhaps adults simply forget what endless energy once felt like. Games begin almost immediately. A stick becomes a sword. A stone becomes treasure. A patch of grass becomes an entire kingdom. Nothing has changed for centuries. Children require remarkably little equipment. Imagination performs most of the heavy lifting. Parents watch while continuing their own work. Because yes, there is still work. Firewood must be stacked. Animals fed. Tools cleaned. Doors repaired. Clothing mended. Tomorrow's preparations quietly begin before today's daylight has even ended. The animals return as well. Cows wander into their familiar enclosures. Sheep crowd together behind wooden fences. Chickens flap onto perches with dramatic determination. Pigs reluctantly accept that dinner apparently ends eventually. Every creature seems to know exactly where it belongs. The evening routine repeats so often that it almost becomes instinct. A cow doesn't need directions. Neither does the shepherd. Habit quietly organizes the village better than written schedules ever could. Inside one cottage, someone begins grinding grain with a small hand quern. The steady circular motion produces flour little by little. It is slow work, patient work. The sound blends with the crackling fire. Nearby, another family repairs clothing. Needle, thread, careful stitches. Nothing fashionable, just practical. A small tear fixed tonight prevents a much larger one next month. Repair often proves easier than replacement. An idea modern wardrobes occasionally pretend not to hear. One elderly grandfather sharpens a knife. The stone scrapes steadily against the blade. Back and forth, back and forth. The rhythm almost resembles meditation. Sharp tools matter. A dull blade wastes effort, injures hands, ruins materials. Maintenance is not considered optional. It is simply part of owning something. Everything receives attention before it completely fails. One wonders how many modern appliances would react to such responsible treatment, probably with genuine surprise. Smoke curls lazily upward from every chimney. The entire village begins smelling like supper. Each household cooks something slightly different. One pot contains barley stew, another cabbage soup. Elsewhere, beans simmer beside onions. Someone fortunate enough to have bacon adds small pieces for flavor, not enormous quantities, just enough to remind everyone what prosperity tastes like. The smell drifts through open doors, warm, comforting, familiar. Cooking over an open fire requires genuine skill. There are no numbered temperature settings, no digital displays, no convenient timer that cheerfully beeps exactly when dinner is ready. Instead, cooks read the fire. Too many flames, too few coals. Move the pot closer, move it farther away. Add wood, remove wood. Experience once again quietly solves another problem. It's becoming something of a pattern. The family gathers as daylight slowly fades. Not everyone speaks constantly. Conversation arrives naturally. Someone asks how the fields looked. Someone mentions seeing deer near the forest. A child proudly reports finding an unusually shaped feather. Another admits dropping a bucket into the well. Again, nobody seems especially surprised. Mistakes belong to childhood. Quite a few continue into adulthood. Somebody laughs gently, not loudly, just enough to lighten the room. Humor survives every century. The jokes simply change clothing. A grandmother tells the same funny story everyone has heard before. Everyone smiles anyway, partly because the story is familiar, partly because she enjoys telling it. Familiar stories become comfortable, rather like old blankets. Outside, swallows sweep gracefully through the evening sky, catching insects before darkness settles completely. The air cools. A gentle breeze carries the scent of cut hay across the fields. Somewhere in the distance, church bells finally begin to ring, not because the day started, because it is ending. For many villages, bells organize life. Morning prayer, midday, evening, special celebrations, warnings, funerals, festivals. One instrument quietly shapes an entire community's sense of time. Before widespread clocks, bells become the village's shared heartbeat. Everyone hears them. Everyone understands their meaning. The sound rolls gently across hills and rooftops before slowly fading into silence. For just a moment, the village seems to pause. Not completely. Life never completely pauses. But enough to notice that another ordinary day has almost reached its end. No king has visited. No battle has been fought. No legendary hero has changed history. Instead, fields were tended. Children learned. Bread was baked. Animals were fed. Tools were repaired, families gathered, and civilization quietly continued. History is built far more often by these peaceful evenings than by famous wars. The famous names fill books. Darkness arrives differently when there is almost no artificial light. That may sound obvious, but it is surprisingly difficult for modern minds to fully imagine. Tonight, if you look out your window, there are probably streetlights, a porch light somewhere, a distant billboard, car headlights sliding silently through the darkness. Maybe the glow of a neighbor's television leaking through the curtains. The night is never completely dark anymore. Medieval Europe was another matter entirely. As the last strip of orange disappears beneath the horizon, the countryside begins dissolving into shadow. Not all at once. Slowly, patiently, the fields lose their color first. Then the trees become silhouettes. The distant hills fade into one enormous black shape against an equally enormous sky. Within an hour, the world has shrunk dramatically. Not physically, visually. During the day, you can see for miles. At night, your entire universe may extend only as far as the firelight reaches. Everything beyond that exists mostly in imagination. Inside the cottages, however, life continues. The fire in the hearth becomes the center of existence. Not metaphorically, literally. Families naturally arrange themselves around it. The warmest place, the brightest place, the safest place. The fire has quietly occupied this position all day. Now it becomes even more important. Its orange glow dances across rough wooden walls. Shadows move gently across the ceiling. Pots continue simmering. The smell of smoke clings to almost everything. Hair, clothing, blankets, furniture, visitors. Even the family dog eventually carries a faint sandalwood smoke. It becomes a fragrance of ordinary life. Modern homes often divide activities into separate rooms. The kitchen, the dining room, the living room, the office, the bedroom. Most medieval homes ask everyone to share. Cooking happens here. Eating happens here. Repairing tools happens here. Spinning wool happens here. Conversations happen here. Sometimes sleeping happens here too. The room is many things at once. Privacy remains an ambitious dream. The evening meal is usually the largest of the day. Nothing extravagant, but more substantial than breakfast or the quick meal eaten in the fields. Perhaps a thick vegetable pottage. Perhaps barley with beans. Maybe cabbage cooked slowly until it becomes soft. If fortune has smiled recently, there may be smoked pork, or salted fish, or a few precious eggs. Every ingredient has a story. The onions came from the garden. The beans were dried months ago. The herbs grew beside the cottage. The bread was baked this morning. The bacon came from a pig carefully raised over an entire year. Nothing appears by accident. Nothing appears instantly. A meal represents months of invisible work. Wooden bowls are passed around. Simple spoons scrape gently against the sides. Nobody worries whether the plates match. They're simply grateful to have plates. Table manners certainly exist. Different regions follow different customs. People wash their hands when possible before eating. Bread often serves as both food and utensil. Small pieces help scoop thick stew. Efficient, edible, one less dish to wash. A practical little invention. Conversation flows more easily now. The hardest work of the day is finished. Bodies relax. Shoulders drop. Voices soften. People talk about tomorrow's plans. Whether the weather might change. Whether someone should visit the neighboring village. Whether the roof really needs repairing before autumn. It almost certainly does. Roofs possess an uncanny ability to require attention at the least convenient moment. Children interrupt occasionally with enthusiastic stories. A frog they discovered. A strange bird they noticed. A cloud shaped like a sheep. Or perhaps a sheep shaped remarkably like another sheep. Children are wonderfully enthusiastic observers, not always wonderfully accurate ones. Still, enthusiasm deserves encouragement. An elderly grandmother quietly laughs. She has heard variations of these stories for decades. Each new generation discovers frogs with exactly the same excitement. Some things never become ordinary if you are seeing them for the first time. Once supper ends, nobody simply sits staring at the fire. There are still things to accomplish. But these evening tasks feel slower, gentler, almost peaceful. One woman resumes spinning wool. Her hands move almost automatically. Twist, pull, wrap, repeat. She barely needs a watch. Years of practice allow conversation and work to happen together. Thread slowly grows longer, almost invisibly, hour after hour. Across Europe, millions of tiny threads are being spun on evenings just like this. Eventually they become cloth, then clothing, then family heirlooms, all beginning with quiet hands beside quiet fires. Nearby, someone begins mending clothing. A sleeve has worn thin. A stocking needs another patch. The knees of a child's trousers have surrendered after enthusiastic climbing. Again, children appear capable of wearing holes into almost anything. The medieval parent quietly accepts this as one of life's constants. Needle and thread move carefully through worn fabric. Each stitch saves valuable resources. Cloth is expensive. Time is cheaper than replacement, at least when winter isn't approaching too quickly. The men often clean and repair tools. A wooden rake receives a new handle. A knife is sharpened again. Leather straps are checked for cracks. Harness buckles tightened. Every tool receives attention because tomorrow depends upon today's preparation. Neglect has consequences, sometimes immediate ones. An axe handle breaking halfway through chopping firewood is deeply inconvenient. An axe handle breaking while felling a tree is considerably more exciting. Not the pleasant kind of exciting. Let's quietly avoid that. The family cat, assuming there is one, begins its nightly patrol. Cats have become remarkably valuable companions. Not because anyone particularly admires their charming personalities, though some certainly do. Their real profession is hunting mice. Mice adore grain stores. People adore grain stores remaining full. The relationship becomes wonderfully straightforward. Feed the cat. The cat discourages the mice. Everyone wins. Well, everyone except the mice. History is full of unfortunate career choices. Being a mouse inside a medieval granary ranks rather poorly. Outside, the village grows quieter. Not silent, never completely silent. Different sounds simply replace the daytime ones. Crickets begin singing. Owls call from distant trees. Dogs occasionally bark at things only dogs seem capable of detecting. Perhaps another traveler. Perhaps a fox. Perhaps absolutely nothing. Dogs have occasionally been known to conduct lengthy debates with empty darkness. Some traditions continue into modern neighborhoods. The stars emerge one by one, then dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. Without electric lights, the night sky appears astonishingly bright. The Milky Way stretches across the heavens like spilled silver. Children grow up seeing this every clear night. They know the familiar constellations. Farmers navigate by stars. Travelers rely upon them. Sailors trust them with entire lives. The sky functions as both calendar and compass. People notice subtle changes throughout the year. Different stars rise. Different constellations dominate. Seasons quietly announce themselves overhead. Most villagers will never travel farther than a few dozen miles from home. Yet every night they look upon the same sky seen by kings, by merchants, by monks, by shepherds, by distant strangers they will never meet. The stars quietly belong to everyone. Religion naturally shapes much of the evening. Many families pray together. Simple prayers. Familiar words repeated across generations. Church life forms a rhythm of countless communities, not merely on Sundays. Everyday life and faith intertwine continuously. Holy days interrupt ordinary work. Saints' feast days fill the calendar. Church bells organize time. Priests preserve written knowledge. Monasteries care for travelers. Religion isn't a separate part of life. It is woven through nearly all of it. Even people who occasionally grumble about the local priest still expect the church to stand at the center of village life. Humans have always possessed a remarkable talent for simultaneously respecting institutions and complaining about them. Some evenings, neighbors visit. Nothing formal. A quick walk across the lane. A shared drink. News exchanged beside the fire. Perhaps someone brings fresh cheese. Someone else offers apples. One family lends a tool. Another returns a borrowed pot. Communities survive because favors travel in every direction. Keeping score rarely works. Helping each other usually does. An old man begins telling a story, not because anyone specifically requested entertainment, simply because stories naturally appear once work slows. He speaks about his grandfather, or perhaps about a lord who lived generations ago. Maybe about a traveler who claimed to have seen cities with walls larger than forests. Whether every detail is perfectly accurate hardly matters. The story itself keeps memories alive. History existed long before historians began writing books. Around another fire, a mother quietly sings while rocking a baby. The melody is simple, gentle, repeated countless times before. Lullabies may be among humanity's oldest surviving traditions. Languages change. Kingdoms rise and fall. Empires disappear. Parents continue singing sleepy songs to tired children. Some customs prove wonderfully durable. One by one, people begin preparing for bed, not because they are especially tired, although they certainly are, because light itself is becoming expensive. Candles require wax. Oil lamps require fuel. Firewood must last until morning. Darkness gently encourages sleep. Tomorrow's work begins with dawn regardless of how late anyone stays awake. The fire is carefully arranged, not extinguished completely, banked, covered with ash, protected. If enough glowing coals survive the night, tomorrow morning becomes much easier. Another tiny act of preparation. Another quiet gift from today's self to tomorrow's self. Outside, the village disappears into darkness. Only tiny windows glow, faintly for a little while longer. Then one disappears. Then another, until eventually the countryside belongs almost entirely to the moon and stars. The people sleeping inside those cottages have no idea that, centuries later, millions of us would wonder what their ordinary evenings were like. To them, it was simply another Tuesday. To us, it is history breathing softly beneath a blanket of stars. By now, nearly every fire has settled into a quiet bed of glowing embers. The village has become little more than a scattering of dark shapes beneath an impossibly bright sky. The last conversations have faded. The final door has closed. Somewhere, an owl calls across the fields. Somewhere else, a dog decides that the moon deserves another strongly worded opinion. And then, almost nothing. Real silence. Not the kind we describe as silence today. While a refrigerator hums in the background and traffic murmurs somewhere beyond the window. This is a different silence. One stitched together from insects, distant animals, rustling leaves, and the occasional creak of old timber settling into the cool night air. It's never completely quiet. Nature doesn't really believe in complete quiet. But compared to our modern world, it feels astonishingly peaceful. Inside the cottages, families prepare for sleep. This is not a long ritual involving scented candles, blue light filters, or arguments about whether checking one more message counts as relaxing. There are no messages, no glowing screens, no endless scroll waiting to steal another hour. Darkness itself gently announces that the day is over. For most people, that is enough. The bedding is simple, very simple. A wealthier household might own feather mattresses. Those are luxurious, soft, warm, the sort of thing visitors notice immediately. Most ordinary families, however, sleep on straw mattresses stuffed inside rough linen sacks. Fresh straw feels surprisingly comfortable. Old straw, less so. Over time it becomes flattened, dusty, sometimes a little damp, occasionally occupied by creatures that did not receive an invitation. Let's politely avoid dwelling on that. Medieval life involved many roommates. Not all of them paid rent. Blankets are precious. Will holds warmth even when the air turns cold. Animal skins appear in some households. Layers matter. Winter nights can become brutally cold inside timber houses, even with a fire, especially after the fire burns low. Sleeping arrangements surprise many modern people. Entire families often share the same room, sometimes the same bed. Parents, children, perhaps a grandparent, maybe an infant in a cradle nearby. Privacy, once again, is something people simply don't expect. Nobody considers it strange. It is merely normal. Normal changes dramatically depending on the century. If someone from the 21st century suddenly complained, "But where's my personal space?" a medieval villager might look genuinely confused. You have the entire field tomorrow. Fair point. The animals are often closer than modern people would expect. In smaller cottages, chickens may roost nearby. A goat might occupy a sheltered corner during harsh weather. Cats wander wherever they please, because cats have maintained exactly the same management philosophy for thousands of years. Dogs settle near the door, not because anyone assigned them that position. They simply understand their job: protect the household. Alert everyone if something unusual happens. Sleep lightly. Repeat tomorrow. Outside, the weather quietly shapes the entire night. A clear evening means cooler temperatures. Clouds trap warmth. Rain drums gently on thatched roofs. Wind slips through tiny gaps in wooden walls despite everyone's best efforts. Homes are warm by medieval standards. That does not necessarily mean they are warm by ours. You quickly learn where the drafts live, and the drafts never move out. The fire still glows faintly. Someone checks it one last time, not casually, carefully. Too much air and it burns away. Too little and it dies completely. Banking a fire becomes one of those ordinary skills that almost never appears in history books. Yet millions of people quietly mastered it. Morning depends upon tonight's careful attention. There is something deeply satisfying about that. The idea that tomorrow begins with a thoughtful decision made today. Around the village, sleep does not arrive all at once. One child falls asleep almost instantly. Another whispers questions for another 10 minutes. A grandfather coughs quietly before finally settling down. A baby wakes, then sleeps again. Life continues even in darkness, just more softly. Many people imagine medieval nights as endless hours of uninterrupted sleep. Interestingly, they often were not. Historians studying household records, letters, and later writings have noticed references to what we now call segmented sleep. Instead of sleeping straight through the night, many people naturally woke for an hour or two after several hours of rest. They called these periods the first sleep and the second sleep. Nobody considered this unusual. It was simply how nights often worked. Imagine falling asleep soon after dark. Several hours pass. You wake naturally, not because of anxiety, not because an alarm went off. Your body simply wakes. The house is quiet. The fire still glows. Perhaps someone else is awake too. You sit quietly. Add another piece of wood to the fire. Say a prayer. Talk softly with your spouse. Check on the animals. Step outside beneath the stars. Then, after a while, you return to bed. Your second sleep carries you gently toward dawn. For centuries, this rhythm appears to have been remarkably common. Only later, with factories, artificial lighting, and increasingly rigid work schedules, does uninterrupted 8-hour sleep become the expectation. History quietly reminds us that even something as ordinary as sleeping changes over time. Outside, the moon climbs higher. On bright nights, moonlight transforms the countryside. Fields shimmer pale silver. Trees cast long shadows. The narrow paths between villages remain visible. Travel at night is possible, just not particularly popular. Dark roads carry uncertainty. A broken wheel, a hidden ditch, a startled horse, or simply becoming lost. Without electric lights, familiar landmarks look entirely different after sunset. Even people who know the countryside well proceed carefully. Besides, most people have little reason to travel. Tomorrow comes early. The forest, however, becomes another world altogether. During the day, it provides timber, berries, mushrooms, and grazing land. At night, it becomes mysterious again. Not necessarily dangerous every moment, just unknown. Unknown things naturally attract stories. Some speak of wandering spirits. Others tell tales of strange lights dancing among the trees. Hermits living alone. Outlaws hiding beneath thick branches. Whether these stories are true matters less than the feeling they create. Dark forests encourage imagination. Human beings have always been remarkably talented at supplying the rest. Back inside the cottages, dreams quietly begin. We rarely know what ordinary medieval people dreamed about. History almost never records dreams unless they belong to kings, saints, or particularly dramatic monks, which feels slightly unfair. Surely someone dreamed about losing a goat, or accidentally baking bread the size of a wagon wheel. Dreams have probably remained wonderfully peculiar throughout history. One little boy murmurs something in his sleep. His mother smiles faintly. She cannot understand the words. Neither can anyone else. Some things remain private, even inside crowded homes. The candle burns lower. Wax slowly drips. Oil lamps grow dim. Eventually they are extinguished. Fuel costs money. Darkness, thankfully, remains free. Outside, clouds drift across the moon. The stars briefly disappear, then return. Time passes almost invisibly. No glowing clock announces 2:17 in the morning. Nobody knows the exact hour. Nobody particularly needs to. Time belongs to the heavens now, to the stars, to the moon, to the slow turning of the earth itself. There is something oddly comforting about that. The night asks nothing from anyone. No appointments, no deadlines, no notifications. Just rest. Of course, not everyone sleeps peacefully. Some people remain awake because of illness, others because of worry, a poor harvest, an unpaid debt, a sick child, an aging parent. Human concerns travel through every century. Technology changes. Anxiety proves remarkably adaptable. Yet even those worries often fade for a little while beneath the steady crackle of a dying fire. Because tomorrow cannot be solved tonight. It will arrive regardless. Perhaps with sunshine, perhaps with rain. Probably with another rooster delivering an unnecessarily enthusiastic announcement. The rooster, after all, remains completely convinced that civilization cannot begin without him. He's probably sleeping at the moment, gathering strength, preparing tomorrow's speech. As the deepest part of the night settles over the village, every cottage seems wrapped in stillness. The fields wait patiently. The tools rest where they were carefully placed. The livestock breathe slowly in their pens. The mill wheel stands motionless until morning. Even the church tower seems to be sleeping beneath the stars. Everything is quiet. Everything is waiting. Because somewhere beyond the eastern horizon, morning is already making its slow, invisible journey back toward the village. And before long, the first faint light will return, not with excitement, not with fanfare, simply with another ordinary day, another chance to begin the rhythm all over again. Long before the sun itself appears, the world begins changing. It is so subtle that if you are not paying attention, you might miss it completely. The darkness doesn't suddenly disappear. Instead, it loosens its grip. The black sky softens into deep blue. The stars begin quietly fading, not because they've gone anywhere, but because something brighter is patiently making its way toward the horizon. This gentle transition has greeted human beings for tens of thousands of years. No alarms, no countdown, just the earth continuing its steady rotation, exactly as it did yesterday, and exactly as it will tomorrow. Inside the cottages, almost everyone is still asleep. The fire has shrunk to a handful of glowing coals hidden beneath a blanket of ash. If the family banked the fire well the previous evening, those tiny embers are enough. A careful hand brushes the ash aside. A faint orange glow appears. Success. A few dry twigs. A breath of air. Another small stick. Soon, delicate flames begin licking upward once again. No matches. No disposable lighter. Fire begins because yesterday's fire never truly ended. There is something wonderfully comforting about that continuity. Every morning carries a small piece of the day before. Outside, the air feels cool. Sometimes surprisingly cool. Even after a warm summer afternoon, dawn often arrives with crispness that clings to grass and settles as tiny drops of dew. Each blade sparkles faintly in the growing light. Spider webs stretch between hedges like delicate silver lace. Most people hurry past without stopping to admire them. There's work waiting. Still, the beauty exists whether anyone notices it or not. The birds certainly notice. They are always among the first. One robin begins singing, then another. Within minutes, dozens of different voices overlap into a gentle chorus. No conductor, no rehearsal, just instinct. For medieval villagers, these sounds are as familiar as breathing. Nobody records them. Nobody uploads them anywhere. They simply happen. Every morning, every spring, every summer, for centuries. Then comes the rooster. Of course, he has been waiting all night for this moment. One loud crow, another, then several more from neighboring farms, each apparently convinced the others have misunderstood the assignment. Soon the entire countryside seems engaged in a competitive shouting match. The rooster's confidence remains one of history's great constants. No matter how many centuries pass, he always behaves as though the sunrise depends entirely upon his personal supervision. It does not, but arguing with a rooster has never accomplished very much. The first people begin stirring inside the cottages. Not everyone wakes happily. That, too, is timeless. One child buries deeper beneath the blanket. A mother gently encourages him to get up. He negotiates. She remains unconvinced. Parents and sleepy children have apparently been having exactly the same conversation since before written history. Eventually, everyone loses the argument against morning. Someone steps outside carrying a wooden bucket. The cool air wakes him fully. Smoke begins curling once more from cottage chimneys. Thin gray ribbons rising quietly into the pale sky. One by one, houses come alive. The village stretches, yawns, and starts another day. There is no dramatic beginning. Life simply resumes. The chickens need feeding. The cows need milking. The sheep need counting. Again, always count the sheep. not for sleeping, for accounting. Sheep possess an impressive talent for discovering holes in fences that nobody knew existed. If one wanders off, today's schedule immediately becomes much more complicated. Milking begins early. The cows stand patiently. Mostly, anyone who has spent time around cattle knows that patiently occasionally includes stepping exactly where your foot was about half a second earlier. A wooden stool is placed beside the animal. A bucket underneath. The rhythm begins. Soft splashes. Steady hands. Fresh milk is one of the day's first rewards. It will become butter, cheese, cream, or simply breakfast. Nothing is wasted. Even the leftover whey often finds another purpose. Efficiency isn't fashionable. It is necessary. Nearby, the goats are already exploring ways to ignore instructions. One squeezes beneath a fence. Another climbs onto something it has absolutely no reason to climb. Goats remain remarkably committed to turning ordinary mornings into tiny adventures. The shepherd sighs, not angrily, more with the quiet resignation of someone who has been outsmarted by goats before and fully expects it to happen again. Experience teaches many lessons. One of them is apparently, never underestimate a determined goat. The village baker has already been awake for hours. Bread waits for no one. Before most people finish rubbing sleep from their eyes, dough has already been kneaded. The oven grows hotter. Loaves begin baking. The smell drifts gently through the streets. Fresh bread possesses an almost magical ability to improve everyone's mood. Some things transcend culture. Fresh bread is one of them. The blacksmith also starts early. His forge glows once more. Hammer strikes iron. Clang. Pause. Clang. The familiar rhythm returns like an old friend. Another day of repairs. Another day of shaping tools that keep fields productive and homes functioning. There are no assembly lines. Every object passes through human hands. Each hammer blow matters. At the village well, the morning crowd gathers again. The conversations begin almost immediately. How did your barley look yesterday? Did the rain ever reach your fields? I heard travelers pass through before sunset. I think old Thomas's pig escaped again. The pig probably did. If not yesterday, then eventually. Village life is wonderfully predictable in that regard. Someone laughs quietly. Someone else shakes their head. News travels from one bucket to another. The well functions as the community's morning newspaper. No headlines, just neighbors. Children, meanwhile, begin another day of learning. Not inside classrooms lined with desks. Inside life itself. A little girl watches her grandmother prepare herbs for drying. She learns which leaves should be gathered before flowering, which roots should wait until autumn. No lecture, no examination, just observation. A boy follows his father repairing a fence. He learns how to split wood without wasting effort, how to tie knots that actually stay tied. Useful information, especially the knots. Human civilization quietly depends upon surprisingly good knots. A traveler approaching the village notices something modern people rarely experience. The smell arrives before the buildings, with smoke, fresh bread, damp earth, livestock, morning dew, perhaps flowering herbs growing beside cottage doors. Every village has its own subtle combination. Not pleasant in every way, not unpleasant either. Simply familiar, the sort of scent people stop noticing after living there long enough, until they leave. Then suddenly they miss it. Homesickness often begins with smells. The traveler walks slowly. Roads remain uneven. Mud collects after rain. Dust rises during dry weather. Travel is rarely comfortable. People accept this without complaint because there isn't much point complaining about roads that have looked exactly the same for decades, perhaps centuries. A cart passes. Its wooden wheels creak rhythmically. Iron bands around the wheels strike occasional stones. The horse pulls steadily. Not quickly. Nobody expects speed. Reliability matters more. A broken axle many miles from home creates problems no one wishes to solve before breakfast. Inside the church, the priest prepares for morning prayers. The church itself already stands quietly waiting. Stone walls cool from a night air. Candles flicker gently. The building offers something unusual in medieval life. Stillness, not because the village is noisy, because churches invite a different kind of quiet. People enter slowly, remove their hats, bow their heads. For some, this is a daily routine. For others, an occasional visit depending on work and responsibilities. Faith remains woven into ordinary life, not separated from it. Prayer exists alongside planting grain, repairing roofs, milking cows, raising children. Everything belongs to the same world. Outside again, sunlight finally reaches the highest rooftops. Golden light slides down timber walls, across gardens, over stone paths. The village, which only an hour ago seemed wrapped entirely in shadow, now glows warmly beneath the new day. Yesterday has quietly become today. The rhythm begins again, almost identical, yet never completely the same. A calf is born. Someone receives good news. Someone else mourns a loss. Seeds grow a little taller. Children become one day older. Time moves forward gently, almost unnoticed. And that may be the greatest lesson hidden inside medieval life. Most history was never made by kings issuing grand commands. It was made by ordinary people waking before dawn, tending fields, sharing bread, repairing tools, raising families, and repeating those simple acts thousands of times across countless quiet mornings. Their names have largely disappeared. Their routines have not, because in many ways, the rhythm of their days still echoes through ours. We still wake, we still work, we still gather around meals. We still worry about tomorrow's weather. We still tell stories before sleep. The details have changed. The heartbeat remains surprisingly familiar. And as another medieval morning unfolds beneath the rising sun, our gentle journey through life before the first bell continues. The sun now hangs comfortably above the horizon, not high enough to make people squint, not low enough to cast those long evening shadows, just comfortably settled into the sky, as though it has quietly accepted responsibility for another ordinary day. By now, nearly everyone in the village is awake. Work is resumed. Smoke rises steadily from chimneys. The blacksmith hammer has already been ringing for quite some time. Children are carrying buckets that always seem just a little too heavy. And somewhere, without fail, a goose has decided that today is another excellent opportunity to argue with absolutely everyone. Some traditions truly are immortal. If there is one thing a modern visitor would notice almost immediately, it is that nobody seems particularly interested in knowing the exact time. Not because they are lazy, not because they are careless, simply because exact minutes are not especially useful. Ask someone in this village what time it is, and the answer might sound something like after sunrise, before midday, when the shadows reach the oak tree, once the cows have been milked, or perhaps when Father Thomas rings a bell. Perfectly practical, remarkably imprecise, and somehow it works. Our lives today are divided into tiny pieces. 7:30, 8:15, 9:02. The medieval day is measured differently. Morning, noon, afternoon, evening, night. The seasons matter more than the hours. The weather matters more than the minutes. The harvest matters more than almost everything else. Time feels wider, slower, not because people have less to do. Quite the opposite, because there is very little benefit in worrying whether it is exactly 10:43. Nobody is waiting for a train. The ox certainly isn't. The ox has never been in a hurry about anything. If the ox could speak, it would probably recommend taking life one steady step at a time. And somehow, it would probably sound convincing. The village church sits near the center of this quiet world. Its tower is not especially tall by modern standards. But here, surrounded by fields and cottages, it dominates the landscape. The building serves many purposes. A place of worship, a place of gathering, a landmark visible from distant fields, a shelter during storms, and perhaps most importantly for everyday life, a keeper of time. Before mechanical clocks become common, bells organize the rhythm of countless communities. Morning prayer, midday prayer, evening prayer, special feast days, funerals, weddings, warnings, celebrations. One bell, many meanings. People learn to recognize them instinctively. The sound rolls across the countryside, carried by the wind. A farmer several fields away pauses briefly, not because he has forgotten what he is doing, simply because a familiar sound quietly marks another point in the day. The bell doesn't hurry anyone. It doesn't demand productivity. It simply reminds the village that time continues moving, slowly, patiently, without asking anyone's permission. Inside the church, the priest has his own daily rhythm. Contrary to popular imagination, medieval priests do far more than conduct religious ceremonies. Depending on the village, they might teach children their prayers, help settle disagreements, record births, record marriages, record deaths, read letters aloud for people who cannot read, write letters for people who cannot write, offer advice, comfort the grieving, sometimes even help organize aid during difficult harvests. It is a demanding role, and one that ties the church closely to everyday life. Not every priest is a brilliant scholar. Not every priest is especially inspiring. History contains excellent priests, terrible priests, kind priests, grumpy priests. In other words, priests are people. History has always supplied a wonderfully varied collection of those. Let's wander away from the church for a moment and visit the village gardens. Nearly every household keeps one. Not enormous, just enough to provide useful food throughout the year. Cabbage grows beside onions. Leeks stand in neat rows. Beans climb simple wooden poles. Herbs fill smaller patches near the door. Parsley, sage, mint, thyme, simple plants. Extraordinarily valuable. A medieval garden isn't designed primarily to look beautiful, although many certainly do. It is designed to keep people alive. Flowers appear too. Some attract bees. Some provide medicine. Some simply make a doorway feel more welcoming. Human beings have apparently appreciated pretty flowers for as long as flowers have existed. One elderly woman kneels beside her herbs. She pinches away damaged leaves, examines tiny insects, moves slowly, deliberately. There is no rush. Plants refuse to grow faster simply because someone becomes impatient. Another timeless lesson. Nearby, bees drift lazily between blossoms. No one fully understands pollination, but everyone understands that healthy bees usually mean healthy gardens. People observe first. Scientific explanations come later. Much later, across the lane, several children gather sticks. Not because anyone told them to collect exactly 37 sticks, because sticks are useful. They become kindling, toy swords, walking staffs, building material for miniature imaginary castles. Children possess an astonishing ability to transform ordinary objects into adventures. Give them expensive toys. Wonderful. Give them 2 sticks and an old bucket. Also wonderful. The imagination quietly fills every gap. A little farther along, an elderly man sits beneath a large oak tree repairing baskets. His fingers move confidently despite their age, weaving willow branches together. Over, under, around, tighten, repeat. The basket slowly grows stronger. Like so many medieval crafts, basket weaving appears deceptively simple until you try it. Then the basket begins resembling something a confused octopus might have designed. Practice, once again, proves invaluable. Baskets are everywhere. They carry vegetables, grain, fish, eggs, firewood, laundry. Almost every household owns several. Modern plastic containers would seem astonishing. Medieval baskets accomplish much the same work, just with considerably more craftsmanship. Near the edge of the village stands a carpenter's workshop. Fresh cut wood fills the air with a clean, sweet scent, a pleasant contrast to the smoke lingering elsewhere. The carpenter studies a rough oak plank. Not every board becomes furniture. Some become doors. Others become wagon parts, stools, shelves, window shutters. Wood behaves differently depending upon the tree. Oak remains sturdy. Ash bends beautifully. Elm resists splitting. Experienced craftsmen know these differences almost instinctively. Again, knowledge built through years rather than textbooks. Wood shavings gather across the workshop floor. Nothing will remain there for long. Someone collects them later. Excellent fire starters. Waste remains the enemy. Resourcefulness remains the rule. As the morning continues, the roads gradually grow busier. A pair of merchants arrives from another village. Their cart carries bolts of cloth, small iron tools, salt, and several brightly colored ribbons. The ribbons immediately attract attention. Bright colors remain surprisingly rare for ordinary people. Natural dyes exist, but many require expensive ingredients. A vivid blue ribbon or rich crimson cloth quietly announces prosperity, not extravagant wealth, just enough comfort to purchase something unnecessary. Luxury is relative. Sometimes luxury is simply owning something beautiful. One little girl stares at the ribbons. She does not ask for one. She probably already understands they cost more than the family can easily spare. Still, looking is free. The merchant notices. He smiles. Perhaps he lets her touch the fabric. Just for a moment. Years later, she may not remember the merchant's face, but she will probably remember how astonishingly soft that ribbon felt. Small moments often survive longer than important ones. The market atmosphere slowly develops. Not every village hosts a market every day. Some gather weekly, others monthly. Larger towns attract traders from much farther away. When market day arrives, the village transforms. Voices fill the streets. Animals shuffle impatiently. Coins change hands. Deals are negotiated. Arguments begin. Arguments end. Usually, markets are more than shopping. They are information exchanges. Political news travels here. Royal announcements. Prices from distant towns. Stories from travelers. Sometimes gossip arrives faster than goods themselves, which is impressive, considering gossip has never required a horse. As the sun climbs steadily higher, people continue moving through familiar routines. Nobody imagines future historians carefully studying these ordinary hours. Nobody believes anyone hundreds of years from now will wonder how baskets were repaired or when herbs were gathered. Yet these quiet routines are precisely what built medieval society. Not spectacular events, not famous battles, just thousands of ordinary mornings unfolding almost exactly like this one. The great kings of Europe may issue commands, but someone still has to milk the cows. Someone still has to bake the bread. Someone still has to mend the roof before winter arrives. Civilization rests upon ordinary hands. Always has, always will. And somewhere above the village, the sun continues its slow journey across the sky. No clock announces the passing hours. No one needs it to. The day itself is keeping perfect time. By late morning, the village has settled into its familiar rhythm once again. From a distance, nothing appears especially remarkable. No royal procession arrives. No knight gallops dramatically across the fields with an urgent message. No mysterious stranger wearing a suspiciously dramatic hood wanders into the square. Real medieval life is wonderfully disappointing in that regard. Mostly, people are just trying to make sure there is enough food for tomorrow, and the day after that, and, if fortune is feeling particularly generous, for the coming winter as well. Food occupies an extraordinary amount of everyone's attention. Modern people spend time deciding what they feel like eating. Medieval people spend far more time making sure there will be something to eat at all. That single difference quietly shapes almost every hour of the day. Let's begin with bread. Again, because bread deserves another visit. It is difficult to overstate how important it is. For many families, bread provides the largest share of daily calories. Rich or poor, nearly everyone eats it in some form. The quality changes. The ingredients change. The quantity certainly changes. But bread remains constant. It is breakfast. It accompanies dinner. It travels into the fields at midday. It appears during festivals. It appears during ordinary Tuesdays. If medieval Europe had a universal comfort food, bread would almost certainly win the competition. The journey from grain to loaf is astonishingly long. Months earlier, someone prepared the soil. Someone scattered seed by hand. Someone protected the growing crop from weeds and birds. Later, someone harvested it with a sickle, then tied it into sheaves, then carried those bundles home, then separated grain from straw, then transported sacks to the mill, then carried flour back again. Only then does baking finally begin. Every loaf contains the labor of countless hours. Modern supermarkets have hidden this remarkable chain of effort so effectively that we rarely think about it. Medieval villagers think about it constantly. They have to. Inside one cottage, dough rests beneath a cloth. Not because anyone consulted an expensive cookbook, simply because experience quietly suggests it is ready. The baker presses one finger gently into the surface. It springs back slowly. Perfect. No thermometer. No digital scale. No timer counting down on the kitchen counter. Just practiced eyes, practiced hands, and years of making exactly the same judgment. The dough is shaped carefully, not artistically, practically. Round loaves fit the oven well. Long loaves cool evenly. Nothing complicated. Nothing wasted. Outside, children already know the smell drifting through the open doorway. Fresh bread, perhaps the greatest fragrance in human history. Warm, nutty, comforting. It somehow promises that everything might be all right, at least until tomorrow. One little boy lingers near the oven just a bit longer than necessary. He hopes perhaps a crust might accidentally become available. Bakers have probably noticed hopeful children hovering nearby for thousands of years. Sometimes patience earns a reward. Sometimes it earns another instruction to fetch water. Life remains unpredictable. Butter is another small miracle of everyday life. Fresh milk collected early this morning now sits inside a large churn. Making butter sounds wonderfully simple. Shake cream. Wait. Receive butter. Reality proves slightly more stubborn. The churning takes time. Quite a lot of it. Back and forth. Again, and again. The rhythm never changes. Arms begin to ache. Someone else takes over. Eventually, tiny droplets of fat gather together into soft yellow butter. It feels almost magical. Science now explains exactly what is happening. Medieval villagers simply know that patient effort eventually produces results, which, honestly, remains excellent advice in many situations. The leftover liquid becomes buttermilk. Nothing is thrown away. Someone drinks it. Someone cooks with it. Waste belongs to wealthy imaginations. Necessity has much better ideas. Cheese follows a similarly patient path. Fresh milk becomes curds. Curds become wheels. Wheels become meals months later. Some cheeses age briefly, others much longer. Monasteries become especially skilled at producing excellent varieties. Monks, it turns out, have historically been surprisingly talented at making both manuscripts and cheese. An admirable combination of skills. A visitor arriving from another century might be tempted to ask, "So, what's for lunch?" The answer depends almost entirely upon the season. In summer, there are fresh vegetables. In autumn, there are newly harvested grains. In winter, there is whatever survived autumn. Storage becomes an art form. Roots remain buried in cool earth. Apples rest carefully in lofts. Beans dry thoroughly before being stored. Salted meat hangs from rafters. Fish is smoked. Herbs dry in bundles suspended from ceiling beams. Everything has its place. Everything has its season. One mistake in storage can ruin months of work. Imagine opening a grain store only to discover dampness has spoiled half the harvest. That is not merely disappointing. It is frightening. Food security remains one of the greatest concerns of medieval households. A full granary brings peace of mind. An empty one steals sleep. Near the edge of the village, a woman gathers eggs from beneath several rather unimpressed hens. The hens mutter quietly. One clearly objects to the entire arrangement. Chickens have always behaved as though every egg collection represents a profound personal betrayal. The woman ignores the complaints. Experience has taught her that arguing with poultry rarely changes anyone's opinion. The eggs are placed gently into a woven basket. Each one matters. Fresh eggs disappear quickly into cooking. Others are preserved. Some eventually hatch into more chickens. The flock slowly grows, or occasionally shrinks after an unexpected fox visits during the night. Nature enjoys maintaining a careful balance. Not always the balance humans would prefer. Let's drift toward the village dairy. Perhaps dairy sounds too grand. Think instead of a cool corner where milk, butter, and cheese receive careful attention. Temperature matters enormously. Too warm and milk spoils quickly. Too cold and certain processes slow dramatically. People understand these relationships through observation rather than chemistry. Again and again, history reminds us that practical knowledge often arrives centuries before scientific vocabulary. An elderly woman tastes a tiny piece of cheese. She nods slightly. Satisfied, she cannot explain bacterial cultures. She certainly understands good cheese. Sometimes expertise needs no complicated language. Nearby, someone stirs a large pot hanging above the fire. Today's meal is pottage. If you lived in medieval Europe, you would become extremely familiar with pottage. Think of it as a thick stew that cheerfully welcomes almost anything edible. Cabbage? Certainly. Beans? Absolutely. Leeks? Of course. Barley? In it goes. A little bacon? If available. Herbs? Always helpful. Yesterday's leftovers? Why waste them? The pot simmers gently for hours. Flavors deepen. Ingredients soften. The meal becomes richer, almost without anyone noticing. There is no single official recipe. Every household creates its own version, some better than others. Family pride occasionally depends upon the quality of one's pottage. Quiet culinary competition has existed for a very long time. The kitchen itself remains busy throughout the day. Firewood must be managed carefully. Too much heat burns dinner. Too little leaves everyone hungry. Smoke escapes imperfectly through roof openings or chimneys. Eyes occasionally water. Clothing absorbs the smell. Nobody comments. Everyone smells like smoke. It would be rather strange if someone didn't. Water continues arriving from the well. Bucket after bucket. Without fresh water, cooking stops. Cleaning stops. Brewing stops. Life becomes remarkably inconvenient. The well rarely enjoys much rest. Someone is almost always walking toward it or away from it. Carrying 2 full buckets requires balance, strong shoulders, and a willingness to accept that water has an extraordinary talent for splashing exactly where is least welcome. A young girl practices carrying smaller buckets, not because they contain less importance, because they better match her size. Every skill begins with smaller versions, smaller buckets, smaller tools, smaller responsibilities. Eventually they become larger ones. No dramatic ceremony marks the transition. It simply happens. One ordinary day she realizes she no longer needs the smaller bucket. No one announces it. Life quietly moves forward. As noon approaches, the smell of cooking spreads through the village once again. Dogs notice first. They always seem to. A cat pretends not to notice while positioning itself suspiciously close to the kitchen door. Cats have mastered the art of looking completely uninterested while remaining perfectly located, an advanced technique. Around the cottages, people pause briefly to eat. Not a long feast. There's still work waiting. Fields remain unfinished. Fences still lean slightly. Tools continue wearing out. The afternoon is already approaching. Yet for a few peaceful moments, families gather. Bread is broken. Butter is shared. Stew is ladled into bowls. Conversation flows quietly. Someone mentions tomorrow's weather. Someone wonders whether the merchant will return next week. A child proudly announces finding another frog. The adults respond with appropriate enthusiasm. History has always depended upon encouraging children to believe frogs are fascinating, because in fairness, they are, beyond the village. Grain ripples gently beneath the breeze. Clouds drift lazily overhead. The church bell will ring again before long. And another ordinary afternoon will begin. One more afternoon in a world where staying alive depends not on extraordinary heroism, but on thousands of ordinary acts, repeated with patience, skill, and quiet determination. By the time the midday meal is finished, nobody lingers very long. There are no comfortable couches inviting an afternoon nap, no streaming service quietly asking, "Are you still watching?" The medieval answer would probably be, "No, I'm still weeding." Work resumes almost as naturally as breathing. A wooden bowl is rinsed. A spoon is tucked into a belt. Someone wipes flour from their hands. Someone else picks up the same hoe they set down only a little while ago. And just like that, another afternoon begins. If there's one thing that surprises modern historians when they reconstruct medieval village life, it is not how dramatic it was. It is how remarkably continuous it was. There is no neat separation between home life and working life. No retirement from daily chores. No weekend. No vacation planned 6 months in advance. There are holy days, feast days, weddings and festivals. Certainly, people laugh, people dance, people rest. But ordinary days are filled with an endless chain of small responsibilities. Finish one task. Another quietly steps forward, rather like weeds. Speaking of weeds, let's return to the fields. The afternoon sun now sits higher overhead, not directly above anymore. Just enough to remind everyone that daylight, useful though it is, will not last forever. Farmers continue moving through long rows of grain. Their pace is steady, not rushed, not lazy, simply sustainable. This is perhaps the greatest difference between medieval labor and the way modern people often imagine it. Yes, the work is difficult, very difficult, but it is rarely frantic. No supervisor is carrying a stopwatch. Nature already is one. The seasons create deadlines that cannot be negotiated. Plant too late, harvest too late, store food too late. Winter remains entirely unimpressed by excuses. So people learn a rhythm that can continue for hours. Step, reach, pull, walk, repeat. The movements become almost meditative. Modern psychologists might describe this as entering a flow state. The villagers would simply call it Tuesday. Nearby, several women gather flax plants. Unlike wool, flax eventually becomes linen. The process is astonishingly complicated. First the plants are harvested, then dried, then soaked, then broken apart, then beaten, then combed. Only after all of that can the fibers finally be spun into thread. A linen shirt begins its life many months before anyone ever wears it. Looking at a finished garment, it is easy to forget the enormous amount of hidden labor stitched into every seam. The medieval world never had that luxury. Everyone knows exactly how much work clothing requires. That knowledge makes people surprisingly careful with it. Across the meadow, hay continues drying beneath the warm sun. Timing matters enormously. Hay cut too early contains too much moisture. Cut too late, and valuable nutrients disappear. Leave it outside during unexpected rain. Weeks of work may suffer. So farmers glance toward the sky with almost professional suspicion. Clouds become important characters in everyday life. A small white cloud means very little. A line of dark clouds gathering along the horizon, that changes everyone's plans. Weather forecasting often depends upon observation accumulated over generations. The direction of the wind, the smell of the air, the behavior of birds, the appearance of distant hills. A shepherd might quietly predict tomorrow's rain simply because the sheep have begun grazing lower than usual. Modern meteorologists would politely request additional evidence. The shepherd shrugs. The sheep have been right before. And every so often, they are. Near the village stream, several children are collecting smooth stones. Officially, they have been sent to fetch water. Unofficially, the stones have become much more interesting. One resembles a tiny egg. Another has curious stripes running across it. A third skips beautifully across the surface of the water. Suddenly, the entire expedition takes twice as long. Human childhood has remained wonderfully consistent. Adults occasionally wonder why simple errands require 30 extra minutes. Children know exactly why. There was a fascinating rock. The explanation feels entirely sufficient. One little girl notices minnows darting beneath the surface. She crouches quietly, watching them. The bucket sits forgotten beside her. Time works differently when curiosity takes charge. Eventually, an older brother reminds her why they came. Reluctantly, she fills a bucket. The fish will still be there tomorrow. Probably. The stream itself performs countless quiet services for the village. Water for drinking, water for cooking, water for washing clothes, water for livestock, power for the mill, fish for occasional meals. Children learn very early that clean water should be respected, not because someone has explained microorganisms. Nobody knows about those yet, but because generations of observation have shown that some water makes people healthier than other water. Practical wisdom often arrives long before scientific explanation. Farther downstream, women wash clothing by kneeling beside flat stones. The work is rhythmic. Soak, scrub, rinse, twist, repeat. Soap exists. Ash. It works. Not perfectly, but well enough. Laundry remains heavy work. Wet wool weighs astonishingly more than dry wool. One soak blanket can feel almost determined to remain exactly where it is. Still, the washing continues. Clothes are stretched across bushes or simple wooden lines to dry in the breeze. The sight becomes familiar throughout every village. Shirts fluttering gently beside fields of grain. Nearby, someone is repairing fishing nets. Each knot is tied carefully. One broken section could mean losing tomorrow's catch. Patience once again proves more valuable than speed. It is remarkable how often medieval life rewards a slow, careful worker. Rushing rarely improves anything. A torn net, a cracked bowl, a crooked wheel. Mistakes become expensive. Care becomes economical. Perhaps that is one of the quiet philosophies hidden inside ordinary medieval work. Do it well the first time. You may not have enough material to do it twice. Back in the village, the cooper is shaping wooden staves for a barrel. Barrels are among the greatest inventions that rarely receive enough admiration. They store grain, beer, wine, salted fish, butter, pickled vegetables, even nails and tools. A good barrel travels easily, protects its contents, stacks neatly, lasts for years. It is the shipping container of the medieval world. Creating one requires astonishing precision. Each curved wooden stave must fit perfectly beside the next. Too loose and the barrel leaks. Too tight and something splits. The cooper works patiently, tapping iron hoops into place. Slowly, a circle becomes a container. Simple, elegant, remarkably effective. Not far away, the village blacksmith is sharpening a plowshare. He pauses occasionally to examine the edge. Not every tool should be razor sharp. Some require durability more than cutting ability. The knowledge lives in his hands. He understands the metal almost like an old friend. Too much heat weakens it. Too little heat resists shaping. There is no digital temperature gauge. The color of the glowing iron tells him everything. Deep red, bright orange, almost yellow. Each shade carries meaning. Each mistake carries consequences. Children often watch from a respectful distance. The forge feels almost magical. Solid iron enters one shape and leaves another. To young eyes, it may as well be wizardry. Truthfully, even adults occasionally pause to admire it. The afternoon slowly begins leaning toward evening once again. Shadows lengthen. The air cools almost imperceptibly. Swallows sweep across the fields chasing insects. A gentle breeze carries the scent of crushed grass and fresh hay through the village. Somewhere, church bells ring softly in the distance. Not demanding, not urgent, simply reminding everyone that another portion of the day has quietly slipped away. No one complains that time moves too quickly. There is little point. The sun has always kept its own schedule. Instead, people adjust naturally. One more road to finish. One more fence post. One more basket. One more armful of firewood. The work never truly ends. Yet it never feels entirely hopeless either, because every completed task matters. Every repaired tool, every loaf of bread, every bundle of hay, every bucket of water. Each small accomplishment becomes another thread woven into the survival of the household. History often encourages us to admire extraordinary people. Kings, queens, generals, explorers. But if you stood quietly in this village on an ordinary afternoon, you might begin to suspect that civilization has always depended much more upon ordinary people who simply refuse to stop doing ordinary things. They planted, harvested, cooked, mended, built, shared, repeated, day after day, year after year, generation after generation, without expecting history to remember their names. And perhaps that quiet persistence is far more impressive than any crown. As the golden afternoon slowly drifts toward another peaceful evening, the village prepares, almost without realizing it, to repeat the ancient rhythm once again. By now, the afternoon has begun its quiet retreat. The sunlight softens again, turning fields of wheat into waves of warm gold that ripple gently whenever the breeze decides to wander through. The hardest work of the day is nearly over. Nearly, in a medieval village. Finished is a word used very carefully. There's almost always one more fence to straighten, one more basket to carry, one more animal that has decided today is an excellent day to ignore instructions. Usually a goat, sometimes a pig, occasionally both. The villagers have long since accepted that nature enjoys adding tiny surprises to otherwise ordinary afternoons. No one seems especially offended by this. They simply saw the problem and continue. That quiet resilience may be one of the least celebrated skills in history. As people begin gathering tools, each one receives a brief inspection. A loose handle is tightened. Mud is scraped from wooden plowshares. Iron blades are wiped clean before moisture has the chance to invite rust. Nothing is simply thrown into a corner until tomorrow. Tomorrow's work begins with today's care. The blacksmith understands this. The carpenter understands it. The farmer understands it. Even children learn it surprisingly young. If you borrow something, return it clean. If you break something, repair it if you can. If you cannot repair it, find someone who can. Communities survive because tools survive. One elderly farmer pauses beside a stone wall, not because he is exhausted, although he certainly feels the years in his knees. He simply watches the field for a moment. Rows of grain sway quietly beneath the evening breeze. The work done today cannot be seen immediately. Seeds do not sprout out of gratitude. Plants never applaud. Nature offers very little instant feedback. It asks for trust instead. Plant today. Wait. Hope. Care for the crop. Wait again. Harvest months later. Modern life rewards immediate results. The medieval world quietly teaches patience. Perhaps that is why older farmers often appear so calm. There is very little use arguing with seasons. Nearby, several women gather laundry that has been drying throughout the afternoon. The linen now feels crisp beneath their hands. The scent is difficult to describe. Not perfume, not detergent, simply fresh air, sunlight, grass, perhaps a little wood smoke drifting across the village. Sometimes the simplest smells become the strongest memories. A little boy runs past carrying a bundle of kindling almost as large as himself. Halfway home, he drops several sticks. He sighs dramatically, looks around, begins collecting them again. His older sister quietly kneels beside him and helps without saying a word. Some lessons are taught through explanation, others through example. This one requires no speech at all. The village dogs become more active as people return from the fields. They greet familiar faces enthusiastically, investigate unfamiliar carts with professional suspicion, escort livestock through open gates, and occasionally bark very confidently at absolutely nothing. Dogs have apparently believed invisible dangers deserve serious attention since the beginning of domestication. No one minds very much. They have earned the right to a few unnecessary warnings. Inside the cottages, preparations for the evening meal begin once more. The fire, which had quietly burned all day, receives another careful armful of wood. Fresh flames climb upward. Pots are lifted into place. Water begins warming. The smell of onions slowly fills the room. It is one of the oldest cooking aromas in European history. Simple, comforting, familiar. A cabbage is chopped. Beans are stirred into the pot. Someone slices yesterday's bread. Nothing elaborate, nothing wasted. Just another meal that quietly represents months of planting, harvesting, grinding, storing, and careful planning. If a traveler arrived from the future and asked, "So, what do you do for fun?" the villagers might blink for a moment. Not because they never enjoy themselves. They absolutely do. The question simply separates life into categories that barely exist here. Work, conversation, music, family, storytelling. They overlap constantly. You can sing while spinning wool, tell jokes while repairing fences, share stories while baking bread. Enjoyment isn't scheduled. It slips naturally into ordinary moments. And perhaps that makes it feel even more genuine. As more people return home, The village paths fill with familiar greetings. Good harvest today? The weather held. Your cow seems happier. I think she simply found better grass. Perfectly ordinary conversations. Perfectly ordinary people. The sort of exchanges that disappear from history books because they happen millions of times without anyone writing them down. Yet these tiny conversations are the glue holding communities together. People know one another. They notice when someone is missing. They notice when someone seems tired. They notice when an elderly neighbor's firewood pile has grown suspiciously small. Help often arrives before anyone formally asks. Not because everyone is endlessly generous, because someday they may need exactly the same kindness returned. Reciprocity quietly keeps villages alive. The church bell rings softly in the distance, not loudly enough to interrupt, just enough to remind everyone that daylight is beginning to fade once more. A flock of swallows circles above the rooftops, diving gracefully after insects. Soon they will disappear until morning. The air cools noticeably now. The warmth trapped inside stone walls slowly escapes. A gentle breeze carries the scent of ripe grain across the countryside. Children, still somehow possessing impossible reserves of energy, invent one final game before supper. A smooth stick becomes a knight's lance. A tree stump transforms into a castle. One child declares himself king. Another immediately disagrees. A spirited negotiation follows. History, it seems, prepares future politicians remarkably early. Fortunately, their kingdom dissolves peacefully when someone's mother announces dinner. Nothing ends imaginary wars quite like hot stew. Smoke rises steadily from every chimney. From a nearby hill, the village appears almost timeless. Tiny cottages gather together, gardens surrounding them, fields stretching outward. Beyond them, forests standing patiently along the horizon. No engines, no electric lights, no distant aircraft drawing white lines across the sky. Only the slow rhythm of people living closely with the land. It is tempting to imagine such evenings as perfectly peaceful. Illness can arrive unexpectedly. Storms can flatten carefully tended crops. A single harsh winter may erase years of careful planning. The villagers know this, every one of them. Yet, remarkably, they continue planting, continue repairing, continue baking, continue raising children, continue telling stories. Hope quietly becomes another daily task, perhaps the most important one of all. The first stars begin appearing overhead, one, then another, then a dozen more. No one rushes to point them out. The sky has always looked like this. Its beauty feels familiar rather than extraordinary. That familiarity may be one of history's greatest luxuries. To live beneath the same stars every night without ever needing to capture a photograph. Simply looking was enough. As darkness slowly approaches once again, another medieval day begins folding itself gently into memory. Tomorrow will look remarkably similar, and yet never exactly the same, because every ordinary day quietly changes the people living through it. Children grow taller, parents grow wiser, grandparents grow slower, fields grow greener, bread grows scarcer or more plentiful depending on the harvest. Time never stands still. It simply walks at a calmer pace than we often allow it today. And with the village wrapped once more in warm evening light, we drift gently toward the final chapters of our journey through life before the first bell. The evening settles over the village with the quiet confidence of something that has happened every day for thousands of years. No one announces its arrival. No grand ceremony marks the end of another day's work. Instead, shadows lengthen across the fields. The air cools just enough to make the warmth of the hearth feel inviting, and the entire village begins moving home almost as one. From the hill above, it is a beautiful sight. Tiny figures follow familiar footpaths worn smooth by generations of footsteps. Oxen pull empty carts more slowly than they did this morning. Children skip ahead, stopping every few moments because every interesting stick, feather, or oddly shaped stone still deserves a closer look. Parents call after them with voices that carry across the evening air. Not angry, just practiced. The same gentle reminders that parents have probably been using since the first child wandered away to investigate something fascinating. The fields themselves seem quieter now. The The wind still moves through the grain, but the constant rhythm of tools striking earth has faded. Birds settle into the hedgerows. A rabbit darts across a narrow path before disappearing into tall grass. Far above, a hawk circles lazily one last time before heading toward its own resting place. Every living thing follows its rhythm. The village is simply one small part of a much larger world. Inside the cottages, the fires glow brighter as daylight slowly disappears. The orange light flickers against rough timber walls that have witnessed decades of ordinary family life, perhaps even generations. One child learned to walk on this floor. Another learned to spin beside this very fire. An old grandfather once carved toys here during long winters. Now a new generation sits in the same place. History often feels distant because we remember names instead of rooms. But real history happened in places exactly like this. A mother quietly kneads tomorrow's bread, not because tomorrow has arrived, because preparation never truly ends. The dough is covered carefully and left to rest. A small task tonight makes the morning easier. The medieval world is full of these tiny acts of kindness people perform for their future selves. Wood is stacked before rain arrives. Seeds are dried before winter comes. Clothing is repaired before holes become impossible to mend. Civilization is built on preparation far more often than inspiration. Near the fire, an elderly woman begins spinning once again. The spindle turns with almost hypnotic grace. Her hands barely seem to think anymore. The movement has become part of her. If someone counted every thread she has spun throughout her lifetime, it would probably stretch farther than she has ever traveled. That thought is strangely beautiful. One quiet life, thousands of ordinary evenings, miles upon miles of thread. Without her work, countless people would simply have no clothing. History rarely records her name, yet her work matters every single day. Nearby, a young boy carefully watches his father sharpen a sickle. The boy asks why the blade curves instead of remaining straight. His father smiles. He picks up a handful of grass and demonstrates the motion. One smooth sweep. The grass falls neatly. No lecture, no classroom. Just a simple question answered beside a warm fire. Tomorrow, the boy will probably imitate the motion with a stick. One day, he will use a real sickle. Knowledge quietly passes forward. Outside, darkness deepens. The stars appear earlier now than they did during the height of summer. The seasons are already beginning another slow turn. People notice, not because they own calendars covered in colorful photographs, because the land itself changes. Morning dew lingers a little longer. The evenings grow cooler. The swallows gather before their migration. Leaves at the edge of the forest begin hinting at gold. Nature never hurries. It simply continues. The villagers have learned to do the same. One neighbor knocks gently on another's door. He isn't bringing important news. He simply has extra apples. The harvest from one tree has been particularly generous this year. Sharing them feels natural. Next year, the favor may travel in the opposite direction. Communities survive through countless exchanges too small for anyone to remember individually. One loaf, a borrowed shovel, a basket of onions, an afternoon spent helping repair a roof. No written contracts. Just trust slowly built over decades. Trust, like good bread, requires time. The church bell rings softly one final time before night fully settles. The sound drifts over rooftops, across gardens, through fields already wrapped in darkness. For a brief moment, almost everyone hears it. A shared sound for a shared community. Not everyone interprets it in exactly the same way. Some whisper a short prayer. Some simply pause. Some continue stirring the evening meal. Life accommodates many quiet responses. The bell asks for awareness more than perfection. As the fire burns lower, stories begin once again. Not heroic epics, just familiar tales. The year wolves came unusually close to the village. The winter the river froze, so solid that carts crossed it. The time someone's grandfather accidentally chased his own pig halfway into the neighboring parish before realizing it wasn't actually his pig. That story becomes funnier every winter, especially for everyone except the grandfather. Children laugh. Adults smile. The storyteller pretends to be offended by the laughter while secretly enjoying every moment. Good stories improve with age. almost as reliably as good cheese. The moon rises quietly over the rooftops. Its pale light mixes gently with the warm glow escaping from cottage windows. The village begins disappearing into the landscape. Once more, one by one, conversations end. Doors close. Candles are extinguished. The stars reclaim the sky. Tomorrow will arrive soon enough. And with it, another ordinary day. Another chance to gather water, bake bread, repair tools, care for animals, raise children, share meals, watch the weather, tell stories, sleep, wake, repeat. It is tempting to call such a life repetitive. Perhaps it is. But repetition is not the same as meaninglessness. The heartbeat repeats. The seasons repeat. Sunrise repeats. Love repeats. Kindness repeats. The small acts that hold families together repeat. Sometimes the most important things in history are the ones that happen over and over again until nobody thinks to write them down. That is a quiet truth hidden inside medieval village life. Not every day changed the world. Most days simply sustained it. And perhaps that was always enough. The fire settles into glowing embers. The village grows still. The stars shine overhead exactly as they did centuries before, and exactly as they will centuries after. Tomorrow, before the first bell ever rings, this peaceful rhythm will begin once again. And with one final morning still waiting beyond the horizon, our journey through this timeless medieval day draws gently toward its close. The village sleeps once more, not because history has reached its ending, but because another ordinary day has quietly completed its circle. The fire has settled into a bed of glowing embers. The last candle has gone dark. Even the dogs, after one final inspection of the yard, curl beside familiar doorways and surrender to sleep. Above them, the night stretches endlessly. Thousands upon thousands of stars scatter across the heavens with a brightness almost impossible for us to imagine today. There are no city lights competing with them, no glowing signs, no passing airplanes, no distant highways humming through the darkness. Only the sky, the same sky that watched Roman soldiers march, the same sky that watched Viking ships cross northern seas, the same sky that watched generations of anonymous farmers quietly begin another ordinary tomorrow. History changes. The stars remain wonderfully consistent. Inside the cottages, families sleep close together beneath wool blankets and patched linen. Children dream beside parents. Grandparents breathe softly after another long day. Somewhere a baby murmurs in its sleep. Somewhere an elderly man turns over on a straw mattress, pulling another blanket across his shoulders as the cool air creeps through tiny cracks in the timber walls. Nothing dramatic happens. Nothing needs to. This is what most of human history actually looked like. Not kings standing upon castle walls. Not armies marching beneath colorful banners. Not grand speeches that changed the course of nations. Most of history happened inside ordinary homes like these. It happened while bread was rising, while mothers sang lullabies, while fathers repaired broken handles, while children learned the names of birds from grandparents who had learned them from theirs. Those moments never appeared in royal chronicles, yet they built every kingdom. The first hint of dawn begins to touch the eastern horizon, almost too faint to notice. The stars nearest the sunrise quietly begin fading. The air grows cooler for one last moment before daylight returns. A robin sings, then another. The countryside slowly awakens, not because anyone commands it, because life simply continues. The rooster, naturally, decides this entire event deserves his personal commentary. He announces the coming morning with absolute confidence. One loud crow, then another, as if the sun itself had been patiently waiting for his approval. Some traditions never change. Inside one cottage, a mother is the first awake. She sits quietly for a moment, listening. The soft breathing of her family, the gentle crackle of embers beneath ash, the distant sound of cattle shifting in their stalls. For just a few peaceful seconds, the entire world seems perfectly balanced. Soon enough, there will be water to fetch, bread to bake, animals to feed, fields to tend, children to guide. But not yet. This tiny pause belongs only to the morning. She brushes the ashes aside. A faint orange glow appears. Yesterday's fire has survived the night. A handful of dry twigs, a careful breath. Tiny flames begin dancing once more. Without realizing it, she has connected yesterday to today, exactly as countless generations have done before her. Across the village, the same quiet ritual unfolds. Smoke begins rising from chimneys. Wooden doors creak open. Fresh morning air fills the cottages. Someone stretches tired shoulders. Someone yawns. Someone quietly smiles at another ordinary sunrise. No one calls it extraordinary. That is precisely what makes it extraordinary. Modern life often encourages us to chase remarkable moments. The medieval world gently reminds us that remarkable lives are usually built from ordinary days repeated with patience, purpose, and care. One loaf of bread rarely changes history. 10,000 loaves keep a village alive. One repaired fence means little. Years of repairing fences protect generations of livestock. One bedtime story seems small. 1,000 bedtime stories shape the people who will someday shape the future. History has always rested upon these quiet repetitions. As sunlight slowly spreads across the fields, dew sparkles on every blade of grass. The wheat sways gently in the morning breeze. The church tower catches the first golden light. Its bell remains silent for just a little while longer, and that silence feels meaningful, because before the first bell, there was already life. Before schedules, there was rhythm. Before clocks, there was sunrise. Before calendars, there were seasons. Before notifications, there were birds greeting the dawn. Before deadlines, there was simply the understanding that another day had begun. Perhaps we have gained much since those centuries. We certainly have. Longer lives, safer homes, better medicine, knowledge that medieval villagers could scarcely imagine. But somewhere along the journey, many of us also traded away something quieter, the ability to let the day unfold at the speed of the sun, to notice the wind moving through tall grass, to hear birds before hearing machines, to measure success not only by what was accomplished, but by whether families shared a meal together before darkness fell. The villagers never imagined they were preserving a lesson for the future. They were simply living. Yet centuries later, their ordinary routines still have something gentle to teach us. That patience has value. That preparation matters. That communities are built through countless small kindnesses. That work done with care leaves traces long after names are forgotten. And perhaps most importantly, that an ordinary day is never truly ordinary while it is being lived. Every sunrise offers another beginning. Every evening offers another chance to be grateful that the fire still burns. The church bell finally rings. Its familiar sound rolls softly across the waking countryside. Farmers step into their fields. Children begin another day of learning. The baker slides fresh loaves into the oven. The blacksmith lights his forge. Life moves forward, exactly as it always has, exactly as it always will. So tonight, as you settle beneath your own blankets, surrounded by comforts those medieval villagers could scarcely dream of, perhaps remember them for a moment. Not the kings, not the queens, not the famous generals whose names fill history books. Remember the nameless baker who rose before dawn, the shepherd counting sheep beneath the stars, the grandmother spinning wool beside the fire, the child carrying a bucket that felt just a little too heavy. They never expected to be remembered, yet they quietly built the world that eventually became ours. And with that peaceful thought, our journey through life before the first bell comes gently to its end. Thank you for spending this quiet evening wandering through another forgotten corner of history. Sleep well, and until our next sleepy adventure, good night.